My name is Damian Thorne, and for as long as I can remember, wrestling has been my life. It's more than a sport. It's a discipline, a way of life, a code. I was an NCAA heavyweight champion in my youth, and after my competitive days ended, I dedicated myself to coaching. Training young athletes, molding them into warriors, gave me a sense of purpose. But life outside the mat wasn't as kind. A year ago, my world fell apart. I remember the day vividly. I came home early from practice, planning to surprise my wife, Joan, with dinner. We had been married for 25 years. 25 years of memories, struggles, victories, and sacrifices. I thought we were solid. I thought we had built something unshakable. I was wrong. As I walked through the door, I heard laughter. Not the kind shared between an old married couple, but something younger, freer. I turned the corner into the living room and froze. There they were. Joan and Brandon Smith, her old college flame, sitting together like they belonged. Brandon had his arm draped casually over her shoulder, and Joan, she was leaning into him like I never even existed. The sight made my blood run cold. I clenched my fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. Joan. Her name came out low, steady, but sharp enough to slice through the air. She jumped, her face draining of color. Brandon, though, had the audacity to smirk at me. That smirk, so smug, so full of himself, ignited something inside me. "Damian, I can explain," Joan started, scrambling to sit up straight. "Explain what? That you're with this clown?" I gestured at Brandon, who, to my growing irritation, was still lounging in my living room like he owned the place. He stood up, puffing out his chest like he thought he was some kind of alpha. "Listen, Damian, let's not make this ugly," he said, his tone filled with condescension. That was it. Years of discipline, of self-control, of being the bigger man, gone in an instant. I lunged. Grabbing him by the collar of his designer shirt, I slammed him against the wall. He grunted in pain, trying to push me off, but he was no match for me. I had wrestled men twice his size. I had taken on real competitors. He was nothing. "You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine?" I snarled, my face inches from his. "You think you're man enough? Damian, stop!" Joan screamed, but I barely heard her. Brandon swung wildly at me, an untrained, pathetic punch. I dodged it with ease and delivered a right hook straight to his jaw. He crumpled to the floor. He tried to scramble up, but I pinned him down effortlessly. "You stay down," I growled. "You stay the hell away from my family." Joan was crying now, pleading with me to stop, but I wasn't listening. I leaned in, my breath hot against Brandon's ear. "If I ever see you near her again, I'll break more than just your pride." He nodded, his face pale and bloodied, his eyes wide with fear. The moment I released him, he scrambled to his feet and bolted for the door, leaving without a backward glance. Joan collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. I stood over her, my chest heaving, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline. That was the end of our marriage. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, replaying everything over and over. The betrayal, the lies, the years wasted. The hardest part wasn't losing Joan. It wasn't even the humiliation of finding her with Brandon. No, the hardest part was losing my kids. Richard and Maria, my son and daughter, turned on me. They blamed me for the divorce. Me, as if I was the one who cheated. As if I was the one who shattered our family. Nothing I said could change their minds. The first conversation with Richard was the worst. He showed up at my house, his face hard, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "Dad, you need to fix this," he said, standing in my living room like he was handing down a verdict. "Mom's not happy, and it's because of you, because of me." My voice rose. "You think I'm the one who ruined this family?" Richard's expression was set. "Dad, you were never there. You were always at the gym, at practice. Mom tried to talk to you, but you never listened." I stared at him, stunned. "I worked hard to provide for this family," I said. "Wrestling is who I am. Your mother knew that when she married me. Yeah, well, maybe she thought you'd change? He shook his head. Maybe she thought you'd grow up and realize there's more to life than wrestling. I clenched my jaw. So, what? That justifies her cheating? That justifies throwing away 25 years? Richard sighed, exasperated. Dad, Brandon actually cares about her. He listens. He pays attention. Maybe he's not perfect, but at least he's there. My son, defending the man who destroyed our family. Maria was no different. She crossed her arms, tears in her eyes, but her words were just as sharp. Dad, she said, you forgot about us, about her. Mom wasn't happy, and you didn't even notice. That stung. Hard. That night they left, and I knew. I had lost them too. The divorce was finalized within months. Joan married Brandon just 2 months after, like she couldn't wait to erase me from her life. My kids? They followed him, and then, the final blow. Brandon offered them jobs at his dealership. They jumped at the chance. I had lost everything. The only thing I had left was the house, my father's inheritance, the one thing Joan couldn't take from me. But it was empty, hollow, no wife, no kids, just me, alone with my thoughts and the memories of what used to be. But life has a funny way of throwing you a lifeline when you least expect it. And my lifeline came in the form of Peter Smith. The days following my confrontation with Richard and Maria were filled with a heavy silence. Not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that lingers after an explosion, the kind that reminds you something has been permanently destroyed. My children had made their choice, and I had made mine. I tried to bury myself in my work, focusing on training my athletes and running the gym, but the betrayal still simmered inside me. Every night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the past in my mind. The anger, the frustration, the overwhelming sense of injustice, it all gnawed at me like a relentless beast. Joan had moved on like our 25 years of marriage had meant nothing. My own children had turned their backs on me as if I were a disposable relic of their past. And Brandon, that smug, arrogant bastard, had won. He had stolen my wife, my kids, and in a way, my dignity. But I wasn't the type to roll over and accept defeat. I wasn't done yet. One evening, I sat in my office, staring at the roster of young fighters I had under my wing. They were hungry, determined, and ready to take on the world. They reminded me of myself in my younger days. Raw talent in need of guidance. That's when it hit me. I was done trying to fix my past. It was time to build my future. I started training harder than ever before. Not for myself, but for my athletes. If I couldn't have my family, I would create a new one. A family that respected me. A family that deserved me. That's when Peter Smith entered the picture. I had coached Peter years ago in high school wrestling. He was one of my best students, strong, disciplined, and relentless on the mat. Unlike Richard, Peter had respect for me. He listened. He absorbed everything I taught him and turned it into action. When he called me out of the blue, his voice was filled with something I hadn't heard in a long time, genuine admiration. Coach Thorne, Peter said, his voice steady. It's Peter. I need your help. I sat up in my chair, caught off guard. Peter? It's been a while, kid. What's going on? I just got signed by a major MMA promotion in Singapore, he said, excitement and nervousness laced in his words. It's a huge opportunity, but I don't want to do this alone. I want you to train me. You're the best coach I ever had. Singapore. That was a world away from the mess my life had become. A new country, a fresh start. No reminders of Joan, no betrayal, no Richard, no Maria. Just me, a fighter who needed my guidance and an opportunity to build something great. Still, I hesitated. Peter, MMA is a different beast. Wrestling and MMA are two separate worlds. That's exactly why I need you, he insisted. You taught me how to fight, not just physically, but mentally. You're the only coach who ever pushed me to be better than I thought I could be. I don't need some flashy MMA trainer. I need you. I leaned back in my chair, weighing my options. Staying here meant I would continue feeling the sting of betrayal every time I saw Joan and Brandon parading around town like they'd won some grand prize. It meant enduring Richard and Maria's silence, unless, of course, they needed something from me. Leaving meant freedom, a clean slate. It was time to go. "All right, Peter," I finally said. "I'll do it. I'll come to Singapore." Leaving it all behind. I didn't tell Richard or Maria that I was leaving. I didn't tell Joan. They didn't deserve a goodbye. I packed my bags, got my affairs in order, and within weeks, I was on a plane to the other side of the world. When I stepped off that plane and breathed in the humid Singapore air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. No Joan, no Brandon, no kids who looked at me like I was the villain of their story. Just me, a new country, and a fresh start. Peter was waiting for me at the airport. He was taller than I remembered, his body hardened from years of intense training. But his eyes held the same fire I had seen in him when he was just a kid on my wrestling team. "Coach," he greeted me with a grin, "welcome to your new home." The next few months were a grind. Peter was a natural athlete, but he needed work. His striking was sloppy. His footwork needed refining. His ground game, while strong, wasn't polished enough for the professional level. I threw everything I had into coaching him. We trained 6 days a week, refining his skills, building his endurance, sharpening his strategy. But it wasn't just about Peter. Word spread quickly that I was in town. Other fighters, pros and amateurs alike, started showing up at the gym hoping to get a piece of what I was offering. Some of them were skeptical at first. After all, I wasn't a traditional MMA coach. I was a wrestling guy. But then they saw the results. They watched Peter transform from a decent fighter into a machine. They saw how I broke down fights, how I analyzed opponents, how I crafted strategies that turned underdogs into champions. Within 6 months, I had a full roster of fighters under my wing, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. Peter's first big fight was against a dangerous opponent, an elite kickboxer with a record of brutal knockouts. The media predicted Peter would get destroyed, but they didn't know what I knew. I had studied his opponent. I knew his weaknesses. I knew he was overly aggressive and left openings when he attacked. I had drilled it into Peter's head over and over again. Stay patient, feel him out, look for the openings. And when you see your shot, take it. The first round was brutal. Peter took some damage. The crowd thought he was done, but I wasn't worried. Between rounds, I grabbed his face and made him look me in the eye. "You're doing good, kid, but listen to me. This guy leaves his body wide open when he defends. Next round, fake a punch, get in close and take him down. Once you get him to the ground, you know what to do." Peter nodded, his breathing heavy but his eyes sharp with focus. The second round began, and just like I predicted, the opening came. Peter faked a jab, his opponent raised his guard, and in a split second, Peter shot in, took him down, and within seconds, locked in a rear-naked choke. The opponent tapped out. The crowd erupted. The fight was over. Peter had won, and I had proven that I wasn't just some washed-up high school wrestling coach. I was back. That victory changed everything. Suddenly, people weren't just talking about Peter. They were talking about me. Fighters wanted to train under me. Promoters wanted to work with me. Over the next 2 years, I trained and cornered fighters in 12 fights. We won 11 of them. The gym in Singapore flourished. Money started rolling in. I went from barely scraping by to making more money than I ever had in my life. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Peter kept winning. His contract with the Singapore promotion ended, and soon one of the biggest MMA organizations in the United States came calling with a lucrative deal. That's when Peter came to me and said the words that changed everything. "Coach, it's time to go home." I knew what he meant. We weren't just going back to America, we were going back to take over, and I had unfinished business waiting for me. The flight back to the States felt different from the one that had taken me to Singapore. The first time I had been running, escaping the wreckage of my life, but now I was returning on my terms. This wasn't a retreat. This was a comeback. Peter sat beside me, earbuds in, his head bobbing slightly to whatever song he was listening to. He had changed in the past 2 years. The nervous young fighter who had begged me to train him was gone. In his place was a man with confidence in his eyes, a warrior who had stepped into the cage and conquered his demons. I watched him for a moment, feeling a rare sense of pride. I had built this. I had taken raw talent and shaped it into something unstoppable. I had done it with Peter, and I would do it again. This was just the beginning. When we landed, Peter's agent had arranged for media to be waiting at the airport. Reporters swarmed, shoving microphones in his face, cameras flashing. "Peter, how does it feel to be back?" one of them asked. "Feels great," Peter said with an easy grin. "I've been training overseas, sharpening my skills, and now I'm ready to take on the best." "And what about your coach?" another reporter asked, turning to me. "Damien Thorne, the man behind your success. What's next for him?" I smiled slightly, keeping my answer short. "I build champions. That's what I do." The cameras clicked, the reporters scribbled their notes, and I knew right then people were watching. They were paying attention. Good. That was exactly what I wanted. Peter's new contract was massive. The biggest payday of his career. The organization treated him like a future star, lining up interviews, promotional shoots, sponsorships. He was the new face of the heavyweight division, and I was right there with him, handling his training, his strategy, making sure he stayed sharp. But I wasn't just focused on Peter. I had a plan of my own. A few weeks after we got back, I took a drive through the city, searching for the right spot. It had to be perfect. And then I found it. An old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building was massive, the bones were solid, and with some work it could become exactly what I needed, a gym. My gym, not some rented space in the back of another guy's business, not some makeshift setup with borrowed equipment. This would be mine, designed by me, built by me, run by me. I called Peter that night. "Found a spot," I told him. He didn't even hesitate. "How much do you need?" I gave him the number, and within an hour the money was wired to my account. Just like that, we were in business. The next few months were a whirlwind of construction, permits, hiring staff. I brought in a nutritionist, a strength coach, a striking coach, guys I trusted, guys who knew the fight game inside and out. And when the doors finally opened, fighters came pouring in. They had heard the stories. They had seen Peter's success. They knew I had built something special, and they wanted to be part of it. Within 6 months, we had a roster of 15 elite fighters. Some of them were young prospects looking to make a name for themselves. Others were veterans who had plateaued, searching for a new edge. They all came to me for the same reason, because I knew how to win. The gym was a machine, running like clockwork. Fighters trained, fights were booked, victories piled up, and the money? The money was rolling in, not just from training fees, but from sponsorships, partnerships, endorsements. I wasn't just coaching anymore. I was building an empire. One evening, as I stood in the middle of the gym watching my fighters work, Peter walked over and clapped me on the back. "Look at this," he said, grinning. "You built this from the ground up. You should be proud." I looked around, taking it all in. The fighters, the coaches, the energy in the air. "I am proud," I admitted. "But this isn't just me. This is all of us. You, the team, everyone who believed in this dream. We did this together." Peter nodded, his expression serious now. "Yeah, we did, and we're just getting started." For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The past was behind me, or so I thought. Because life has a funny way of circling back when you least expect it. It started with a phone call, a name I hadn't seen on my screen in years. Richard. I stared at the name for a long moment, debating whether to answer. Finally, I picked up. "Richard," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "This is a surprise." There was hesitation on the other end. Then, finally, he spoke. "Hey, Dad," he said. I wanted to let you know I got married, and I have 2 kids now." I blinked, caught off guard. Married. Kids. My son had built an entire family, and I hadn't even known about it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. "Oh," I said flatly. "So you got married and had kids? That's nice. How would I know? You never told me." Richard sighed. "Dad, it's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated, my tone sharpening. "What's complicated about inviting your own father to your wedding? About telling him he's a grandfather?" There was a long pause. Then Richard said the words that made my blood boil. "If I invited you, it would have made Brandon upset." Brandon. That name. That man. Even after all these years, even after I had left them behind, Brandon was still in my way. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You didn't invite me because it would have upset Brandon, the man who destroyed our family?" "That Brandon?" Richard didn't respond, and the silence only fueled my anger. "Have some shame, Richard," I snapped. "I think I raised you better than this. But then again, you're also your mother's child. I guess selfishness runs in your blood." "Dad, that's not fair," Richard started, but I cut him off. "Not fair?" I barked. "What's not fair is you cutting me out of your life and expecting me to be okay with it. What's not fair is you choosing him over me." More silence. I took a slow breath, my voice turning cold. "Congratulations on your family," I said. "I hope they treat you better than you treated me." And then I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. Anger, hurt, disappointment. It all swirled inside me, a toxic mix I couldn't shake. My own son, my own flesh and blood had chosen Brandon over me, had erased me from his life as if I was nothing more than a footnote in his past. And as much as it hurt, I knew I had to let it go. I had a new family now, my fighters, my gym. And I wasn't about to let the past drag me down again. 2 days later, my phone rang again. This time it was Maria. I stared at her name, my finger hovering over the answer button. I already knew why she was calling, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. I let Maria's call ring until it went to voicemail. Then I turned off my phone. I wasn't in the mood. Not for her, not for Richard, not for anything that had to do with my old life. But the past had a way of refusing to stay buried. 2 days later, she called again. This time, I picked up. "Maria," I said, my voice flat. "What do you want?" There was a long pause on the other end, like she was picking her words carefully. "Dad," she finally said, "I want to meet you. I think we need to talk." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a familiar anger creeping up my spine. "Talk about what?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. "You made your choices, Maria. You and Richard both. What's there left to talk about?" She sighed, frustration seeping into her voice. "Dad, stop. Just stop. You can't keep acting like everything is fine. It's not. We're family, and we need to fix this," I scoffed. "Fix what exactly? The fact that you cut me out of your life? The fact that you both took Brandon's side? The fact that you didn't even bother to tell me when you got married or had kids?" Maria's voice sharpened. "You don't get it, do you? You don't get why we're upset. You broke this family, Dad. You're the reason Mom left. You're the reason everything fell apart." Her words landed like a slap. I gritted my teeth, my fingers tightening around the phone. "I broke the family?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. Let me get this straight, Maria. I'm the one who cheated? I'm the one who brought Brandon into our lives? I'm the one who decided to destroy 25 years of marriage for a quick fling? You were never there, she shot back. You were always too busy with your wrestling, your athletes, yourself. Mom was miserable and you didn't even notice. You didn't care. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. Maria, I said evenly, I don't have the energy for this. I don't want you to call me again. I hope I'm making myself clear. Dad, wait. Goodbye, Maria. I hung up before she could say anything else, and then I blocked her number, not out of anger, not out of spite, out of self-preservation. I was done. Done trying to fix something that was beyond repair. Done pretending that things could ever go back to the way they were. I had moved on, and it was time for them to understand that. A week passed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The gym was thriving. My fighters were training harder than ever. We had a stable of elite athletes, and the wins kept piling up. Life was good, until Brenda, my receptionist, buzzed through to my office one afternoon. Damien, she said hesitantly. Richard and Maria are here. They tried to walk in without checking in, and when I stopped them, they got upset. Really upset. I sighed, already feeling the headache coming on. Stay put, Brenda, I'll handle it. When I stepped out of my office, I could already hear their raised voices. Richard was leaning over the front desk, pointing aggressively at Brenda. This is unacceptable, he barked. Do you even know who we are? My father owns this place. Maria stood beside him, her arms crossed. We don't need permission to walk into a gym, especially not from some low-level employee. I clenched my jaw, stepping between them and Brenda. What's going on here? Richard straightened up, flashing me that same smug look that had always irritated me. Finally, he said, your little gatekeeper here thinks she has the right to stop us from coming in. I folded my arms across my chest. That's her job, Richard. Everyone checks in. No exceptions. Maria scoffed. Seriously? You're siding with her? We're your family. We don't need to check in. Actually, I said coolly, you do. And threatening my staff? That's unacceptable. You need to leave. Richard's face twisted with disbelief. You're supporting this nobody over your own flesh and blood? That was it. I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. Listen to me, I said. You're going to turn around and walk out of here, right now, or I will have you removed. Richard's eyes flicked past me to the fighters training on the mats. One of them, Andre, a middleweight with a reputation for being vicious in the cage, had stopped mid-session, his sharp eyes locked onto Richard. Maria must have noticed too because she grabbed Richard's arm. Let's go! Richard glared at me, his hands clenching into fists. You'll regret this, Dad. I didn't even flinch. Get out! They stormed off, and as the doors slammed shut behind them, I turned to Brenda. You okay? She nodded, a little shaken but steady. I'm fine. Good, I said. If they ever come back, don't engage. Call me. That evening, I reviewed the security footage. I wanted everything on record, and then I sent it straight to my lawyer. The next day, I filed a restraining order against both of them. Enough was enough. Richard and Maria were officially out of my life. I knew why they had come. I wasn't stupid. Something was happening. Something big. So I did some digging. There was a guy named Tony who used to train at the gym. He worked as a mechanic at Brandon's dealership. One night after training, I pulled him aside. Tony, I said, keeping my voice casual, you still work at Brandon's place? Yeah, Coach. Why? I shrugged, just wondering if there's been any, trouble over there lately. Tony hesitated, then lowered his voice. Look, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but yeah, there's trouble. Big trouble. I leaned in. How bad? Brandon's been messing around with the books for years. Tax evasion, shady deals. The IRS caught wind of it, and now he's looking at some serious penalties. Either he pays up or he goes to jail. I let the information settle. So that was it. Brandon was about to lose everything, and with him, Richard and Maria were going down too. Richard was the marketing officer. Maria handled accounts. If Brandon's business collapsed, so did theirs. And suddenly, after all these years, they remembered dear old Dad. Not because they missed me, not because they wanted to make things right, because they needed money. I thanked Tony and sent him on his way. Then I sat back, staring at the gym floor, watching my fighters train. Richard and Maria thought I was some stupid old man they could manipulate. They thought they could walk back into my life, use my success to bail themselves out, and then disappear again. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I had spent years sharpening fighters into champions. I had built this empire from the ground up. I wasn't going to be played. If they wanted to fight dirty, so could I. They had made their bed. Now they were going to lie in it. 3 days after Richard and Maria showed up at my gym, I got another call from Brenda. "Damien," she said, her voice tense, "they're back." I sighed, already feeling the familiar headache coming on. "Alone?" "No." She hesitated. They brought kids with them." I sat up in my chair. That was a new one. "Kids?" I repeated. "Yeah, a boy and a girl, probably 3 or 4 years old." I exhaled slowly. So this was their next move. I should have seen it coming. The desperate plea for sympathy. The last-ditch effort to make me cave. "Send them to my office," I said. "Let's get this over with." A few minutes later, Richard and Maria walked in, each holding a child by the hand. The kids were wide-eyed, taking in the space, clearly confused about where they were. Richard sat down first, forcing a smile. "Dad," Maria followed his lead. "Thanks for seeing us." I leaned back in my chair, arms folded. Cut to the chase. They exchanged a quick glance before Maria spoke first. "Dad, it's time," she said softly. "It's time we move past everything. These kids, they should know their grandfather." I almost laughed. "Oh, now I'm their grandfather?" I asked, my voice flat. "Funny. You didn't seem to care about that when you cut me out of your lives." Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. "Dad, come on, we were young. We made mistakes. We just want to fix things." I narrowed my eyes at him. "No, you don't. You want something from me, so why don't you stop pretending and just say it?" Maria bit her lip. Richard exhaled sharply, then finally cracked. "Fine," he said. "I need investors for a used car dealership." I smirked. There it was. "Let me guess," I said. "Brandon's in trouble and now you need my money to clean up his mess?" Richard's face turned red. "It's not like that." I tilted my head. "Then what's it like, Richard? Explain it to me." Maria tried a softer approach. "Dad, we're not asking for a handout. This is a business opportunity. You'd be investing and we'd make sure you got a return." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "No." Richard's jaw clenched. "No?" "That's right," I said. "I'm not giving you a cent. You made your choices. Now you live with them." Maria's expression hardened. "Dad, don't be like this." I leaned forward, my voice ice cold. "I'm being exactly like this." Richard shot to his feet, his face twisted with anger. "You're unbelievable. You have all this money, and you're just going to sit there and watch your own kids struggle?" I stood up too, leveling him with a steady stare. "I don't reward betrayal," he scoffed, shaking his head. "Wow, you know what, Dad? Mom was right about you." I smiled, but it wasn't a friendly one. "Which part? The part where I was the bad guy, or the part where she couldn't wait to jump into another man's bed?" Richard's hands curled into fists. "You're a miserable old man. That's why she left you." I chuckled. "No, Richard. She left because she thought she could do better. And now, the man she chose is about to lose everything." Richard flinched. Maria looked down. They both knew I was right. I nodded toward the door. "Get out." Maria hesitated, glancing at the kids. "Dad, please. If not for us, at least for them." I felt a pang of something deep inside me. For a moment, just a moment, I considered it, but then I remembered. They had let me miss everything. The wedding, the births, the first words, the first steps. I wasn't a grandfather to these kids. I was a stranger. That was their doing, and I wasn't about to be used as a financial safety net just because their world was falling apart. I forced my expression to stay cold. "You don't get to play the family card when it suits you," I said. "You made sure I wasn't part of their lives. You don't get to change that now." Maria's face crumpled. "Dad," I said, "get out." Richard muttered something under his breath, then turned and stormed out, dragging his son along. Maria lingered for a moment, staring at me with desperate eyes. "Please," she whispered, "just think about it." I met her gaze, unblinking. I already did. Her shoulders sagged. She turned, took her daughter's hand, and followed Richard out the door. The moment they were gone, I sat down heavily, exhaling. I had done the right thing. I knew I had. So why did it still hurt? The news broke 5 days later. Brandon had been arrested. Tax evasion, fraud, money laundering. Everything Tony had told me turned out to be true, and worse. The government seized his assets, his house, his cars, his bank accounts. Everything was gone, and with it so were Richard and Maria's jobs. They lost their homes too. Because, as it turned out, Brandon had been paying for everything. They had nothing. For a fleeting moment, I felt pity. But only for the kids. Not for Richard, not for Maria. They had chosen their side, and now they were paying the price. Later that night, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Joan. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered. "Damien," she said, her voice pleading. "Listen, I know you're upset, but please, Richard and Maria need help. They have nowhere to go. The kids—" I cut her off. "Stop right there." She hesitated. "Damien, please, they're still your children." "No, they're not," I said coldly. "They stopped being my children the moment they betrayed me. I'm done, Joan. Done." "They're suffering," she insisted. I laughed. "So was I, Joan. When you left me, when you let our kids believe I was the villain, when you married the man who helped destroy our family. Did you care then?" She went silent. "That's what I thought," I said. "Don't call me again." And then I hung up and blocked her number. 2 days later, the final nail in the coffin came. Maria was arrested. Turns out she wasn't just a bystander in Brandon's scheme. She had actively helped cover up his crimes. Her husband filed for divorce the same day, took the kids and left. Richard's wife did the same, packed up and disappeared with their children. In the span of a week, everything they had built collapsed. They had no money, no homes, no family. I could have saved them, but I didn't, because they had made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. The news about Maria's arrest spread fast. It was everywhere: local news, social media, even a segment on a business scandal podcast. Brandon's empire had crumbled, and Maria had gone down with it. Richard wasn't far behind. His name was tied up in enough shady business dealings that he was under investigation, and his personal life had imploded. His wife had left, taking their children, and he was drowning in legal fees and debt. They had lost everything, and I felt nothing, no pity, no regret, no guilt, because they had done this to themselves. For years, they had turned their backs on me, chosen Brandon, humiliated me, belittled me. They had erased me from their lives when they thought they were winning, and now that they had lost, they expected me to come running? No. I had spent too many nights alone in that house, questioning myself. I had spent too many years being blamed for things that were never my fault. I wasn't about to undo everything I had built just because karma had finally come knocking on their door. A week passed, then 2. The calls stopped, the texts stopped, the begging stopped. It was over. I had won. With the past finally behind me, I threw myself into the gym more than ever. Peter's heavyweight title fight was coming up. This was the biggest moment of his career, the biggest fight we had ever prepared for. We trained like madmen, early mornings, late nights, sessions so brutal that even the younger guys started dropping out halfway through. But Peter never quit. Neither did I. Because this wasn't just about a title. It was about proving we belonged here. That our gym was the best. That we were unstoppable. Fight night arrived, and the air in the arena was electric. The crowd was massive, the energy palpable. Peter's opponent was a beast, a seasoned striker with devastating knockout power. Everyone thought this was going to be Peter's toughest fight yet. They were right. The first round was brutal. Peter took a hard shot to the ribs, and I could see the pain flash across his face, but he didn't break. Between rounds, I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look me in the eye. "Breathe," I said. "This guy is powerful, but he's predictable. He's throwing everything at you, and it's not enough. Stay patient. Wait for your opening." Peter nodded, his breathing heavy but steady. "Got it, coach." The second round started. The opening came. Peter dodged a wild hook, shot in for a takedown, and within seconds, he had his opponent on the mat. And once Peter was on top, it was over. Ground and pound, relentless pressure. The referee stopped the fight. Peter won. New heavyweight champion. The crowd exploded. Peter fell to his knees, overwhelmed with emotion. I watched from the corner, arms crossed, a rare smile tugging at my lips. This was what it was all about. During the post-fight interview, Peter wiped the sweat from his face and grabbed the mic. I just want to thank my team," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "And most of all, I want to thank my coach, Damian Thorne." The crowd erupted in cheers. "He believed in me when no one else did," Peter continued. "He pushed me harder than anyone ever has, and I wouldn't be standing here with this belt if it wasn't for him." The interviewer turned to me. "Coach Thorne," she said, smiling, "Peter credits much of his success to you. What do you think makes you such a great mentor?" I thought for a moment, then said simply, "I give them direction. They run hard. These boys, they're the best of the best. And mark my words, all the divisions will be ruled by our gym." The crowd ate it up. The victory solidified our gym's reputation as one of the best in the sport. The calls started coming in immediately. More fighters, more sponsors, more opportunities. We weren't just a gym anymore, we were a dynasty in the making. A few days later, I got a call from ESPN. They wanted to do a feature on me, the man who had been left for dead, who had been cast aside and betrayed, was now headline news. The segment aired a week later, showcasing my journey, my wrestling days, my coaching career, my fall, and now, my rise. They played old footage of me slamming opponents on the mat, then cut to clips of me cornering Peter and my other fighters. They called me the Architect of Champions. It was surreal, watching my entire life story unfold on screen like that. When the segment ended, my phone blew up. Calls, texts, social media notifications. But the one message that stood out was from Peter. "You deserve this, coach. You earned it." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. 3 weeks later, I was in Las Vegas for another fight. This time, it was Andre Gonzalez, one of my middleweights, going for a title shot. Andre had been with me since the beginning. I had drilled wrestling into his bones. He was ready. The fight was one-sided from start to finish. Andre dominated. When the final bell rang, there was no doubt. Andre was the new middleweight champion. As the referee raised Andre's hand, the crowd cheered. But what happened next took me by surprise. Andre grabbed the mic. "I want to thank my team," he said. "But most of all, I want to thank Coach Thorne." Then, in front of thousands of people, Andre walked over, unstrapped the championship belt from his waist, and draped it over my shoulders. The crowd lost their minds. I stood there, stunned, the belt heavy across my shoulders. "Coach," Andre said, looking me in the eye. "This is as much yours as it is mine." The cameras flashed. The headlines wrote themselves. The next morning, I woke up to front-page news. Damian Thorne, the man behind the champions. I stared at the newspaper, letting it all sink in. Everything I had lost, everything I had built, everything I had become. I wasn't just some washed-up high school coach anymore. I was the best, and I wasn't done yet. It had been a long road to get here, but as I stood in the middle of my gym, watching my fighters train, listening to the rhythmic sound of gloves striking pads and the occasional sharp command from one of the coaches, I realized something. This was the life I was meant to have. Not the one where I spent my nights sitting in an empty house, drowning in regret over a woman who never truly valued me. Not the one where I bent over backward trying to be a father to children who didn't care until they had nowhere else to turn. No, this was my real family. The men who stepped onto this mat every day, who listened, who pushed themselves to their limits because they believed in me, because they trusted that I could take them to the top. I had built something greater than I ever could have imagined. This gym wasn't just a business. It was a legacy. A place where champions were forged. And if my own flesh and blood didn't want to be part of my life, then so be it. I had people who respected me, who appreciated the work I put in, and that was enough. More than enough. Peter's victory had only solidified my reputation, and Andre handing me that championship belt on live television had put the final stamp on it. Suddenly, everyone wanted to train with us. We weren't just a gym anymore. We were the gym. Promoters, sponsors, even scouts from some of the biggest organizations in the world started reaching out, all wanting to be a part of what we were building. I had spent my whole life fighting, on the mat, in my personal life, in my mind. But for the first time, I wasn't fighting to prove my worth to anyone. I already knew it. Despite the success, I made sure to stay sharp, never complacent. The moment you think you've made it, that's when someone younger, hungrier, and more disciplined comes along to take your spot. So while I could have sat back, cashed in on the fame, and let things run themselves, that wasn't who I was. I was still the first one in the gym every morning, and the last one to leave at night. My fighters trained hard, and I trained harder. I drilled techniques with them, studied fight tapes, and pushed them to places they didn't think they could go. I wasn't going to let any of them get comfortable. We were building legends, and legends never settle. The more we won, the more my name spread. My fighters were dominating in every division, and my gym became known as the place where champions were made, not born. We weren't just training fighters. We were building dynasties, and that's when the unexpected happened. One afternoon, I was in my office going over training schedules when Brenda, my receptionist, buzzed through. "Damian," she said cautiously, her voice carrying a weight I recognized all too well. "There's someone here to see you?" I sighed, already feeling the irritation creeping in. "Is it someone I actually want to see?" She hesitated. "It's Richard." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just sat there, staring at my desk, feeling that old, familiar anger flicker to life inside me. Richard. The son who had turned his back on me, who had only come crawling back when he had lost everything. I had already slammed that door shut, made it clear that he was nothing to me anymore. So why was he here? I exhaled through my nose and finally said, "Send him in." I wasn't interested in hearing any apologies, and I definitely wasn't going to give him what he wanted. But if he had the nerve to show up here, then I'd at least let him say his piece, before I threw him right back out. When Richard walked in, he looked different. Not just older, but defeated. There was none of the smug arrogance, none of the entitlement. He was thinner, his clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who had lost everything, and was just now realizing that he was the only one to blame. He sat down across from me, rubbing his hands together like he was nervous, which was almost laughable. This was the same man who had screamed in my face, who had threatened my staff, who had told me I was a failure while he was riding high on the life that Brandon had given him. And now? Now he looked like a stray dog begging for scraps. I leaned back in my chair, my expression cold. "Say whatever it is you came here to say." Richard swallowed hard. "Dad, I don't even know where to start." "That's a first," I muttered. His jaw tightened, but he didn't take the bait. Instead, he took a deep breath and said, "I messed up." I raised an eyebrow. "You think?" He shook his head. "No, I mean, I really messed up. Not just with Brandon, not just with the business. With you, with everything. I see that now." I stayed silent, letting him sit in his own discomfort. "I was wrong," he continued, his voice quieter now. "I let Mom poison my mind against you. I let Brandon control my life. And when it all came crashing down, I realized I had nothing. Because the only real thing I ever had was you." I stared at him for a long moment, my fingers tapping against the desk. "So what do you want, Richard?" I asked finally. "An apology accepted? A fresh start? Money?" His eyes flickered with shame. "No," he said, "I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to say it. To say that I know what I did. And that I'm sorry." I studied him carefully, searching for any sign of manipulation, any sign that he was only here because he thought he could still get something out of me. But I didn't see it. All I saw was a broken man who had lost his way. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hate. I just felt nothing. "That's good, Richard," I said, standing up. "You should be sorry." He blinked, looking up at me. "That's it?" "That's it." I walked to the door and held it open. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He just nodded slowly, stood up, and walked past me. As he stepped into the hallway, he turned back one last time. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, "but I hope one day you'll let me be part of your life again." I didn't respond. I just shut the door. That night, I sat alone in my office long after the gym had closed. I wasn't thinking about Richard. Not really. I had already made peace with the fact that I might never see him or Maria again. What I was thinking about was how far I had come. Years ago, I had been a man broken by betrayal, a man who had lost his family, his dignity, and his sense of self-worth. But now I was stronger than ever. I had built my own family, a family of fighters, of warriors, of people who actually cared about me, not because they wanted something, but because they respected me. And that was all I ever needed. As I turned off the lights and stepped onto the mats one last time, I let a small smirk cross my lips. Life was good, and it was only going to get better. Here's the next story. I lived with my ex for 2 years, and we had plans to get engaged. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. We had a cozy little apartment, shared dreams for the future, and a relationship that to anyone else looked solid. But inside, I was struggling with feelings I couldn't quite explain. There was this growing sense of restlessness, this gnawing feeling that something was missing, but I didn't know what. Then, I made some new friends. They were lively, exciting, and had a way of making life feel less predictable, less routine. They introduced me to new experiences, new ideas, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I thought bringing them into my world would bridge the gap I was feeling, that maybe my ex and I could be part of something bigger, something more thrilling. At first, everything seemed fine. He met them, got along with them well enough, and I convinced myself that nothing was wrong. But around that time, I started keeping secrets. I created a private Instagram account, one that he didn't know about. One of the women in the couple encouraged me to do it, telling me it was harmless, that it was just a little private space for self-expression. She even showed me hers, filled with pictures that were flirtatious, daring, but never outright explicit. I followed her lead, and suddenly I was in a different world. A world where attention came easily. At first, it was just for fun, posting photos that were a little risque, a little more revealing than what I normally shared. But then the comments started rolling in. Men messaging me, complimenting me, telling me how beautiful I was, how much they wished they could have me. It was intoxicating. A rush I hadn't felt in years. Some of them even made offers, money, gifts, things I would have never considered before. I told myself it was harmless, that it didn't matter because I never showed my face, that as long as I wasn't meeting up with anyone, I wasn't really doing anything wrong. But deep down, I knew better. Then I met the polyamorous couple through my new friends, and everything changed. They were open, confident, completely at ease with their lifestyle. They made it seem so simple, so natural. We talked for hours, and before I even realized it, I was confiding in them about my relationship. But I wasn't being honest. Instead, I painted my ex in a way that justified my actions. I told them he was controlling, that he didn't appreciate me, that I felt trapped. None of it was true. He was kind, supportive, and patient, but I needed to believe that I was the victim in all of this. That lie opened a door I should have kept locked. What started as innocent conversations turned into something much more. The first time I cheated, I told myself it was a mistake, that it wouldn't happen again. But it did. Over and over. Each time, the shame would creep in, but I buried it. I would go back home, pretend like nothing had happened, even send my ex intimate photos to keep up the illusion that everything was fine. I had become someone I didn't recognize. Then he found out. I didn't even realize it at first. But something about him changed. He was quieter, more distant. He looked at me differently, with something cold in his eyes that hadn't been there before. At first, I thought it was nothing. Just one of those small, rough patches that every couple goes through. But then I saw his phone. He had found my private Instagram account. I should have come clean then and there. I should have told him the truth, taken whatever consequence came my way. But I didn't. I pretended like I didn't notice his shift in behavior, like everything was normal. And then, a few days later, he found my messages. All of them. The lies I had told my friends about him, the flirtatious exchanges, the messages with the couple, the photos, the videos, everything. When I walked into our apartment that night, he was waiting for me. His face was unreadable, but his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "Do you have anything you want to tell me?" His voice was calm. Too calm. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew. I knew. I tried to play dumb to act like I didn't understand what he meant, but then he pulled out his phone, scrolled through my messages, and shoved it in my face. Explain this. I panicked. I denied. I tried to twist the truth, to spin some kind of excuse that would make it all seem like a misunderstanding. But he wasn't listening. His voice rose. His anger boiled over. He called me a liar, a manipulator, a cheater. And he was right. I had betrayed him in the worst way possible. And then he did something I didn't expect. He didn't leave. Instead, he made me leave. He told me to pack my things and get out, that he couldn't look at me anymore, that I had destroyed everything we had built together. I begged. I cried. I told him I was sorry, that I could fix this, that we could fix this, but he was done. And just like that, I lost everything. I spent the next few weeks crashing at a friend's place, but nothing felt real. I kept replaying everything in my head. The night I met the couple, the first message I sent, the first moment I stepped over the line. I told my friends the truth, admitted that everything I had said about him was a lie. I told the couple that I couldn't see them anymore. But none of that changed anything. None of it could undo the damage I had caused. Some nights, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering what had gone so wrong inside of me. Why had I done this? Why had I taken a good man, a good relationship, and burned it to the ground? I thought about therapy, but it was expensive, and money was tight. The only thing I had left was enough for a deposit on a new apartment, and even that felt like a hollow attempt at moving forward. Some nights, when the regret became too heavy, I even considered taking up one of the offers from my messages. It would be easy, quick money, a way to survive, but every time I stopped myself. I couldn't sink that low. I had already lost my self-respect once. I wouldn't throw away what little I had left, but respect didn't pay the bills. Some days I felt like I was making progress. Others, the guilt was so overwhelming that I could barely breathe. I wanted to tell him I was sorry, but I knew he didn't want to hear from me. So instead, I sat in my own mess, forced to face what I had done. I had to change. I had to be better. I just hoped that someday I would be able to look back at this and know that I had grown, even if I could never fix what I had broken. After losing everything, I thought the regret would fade over time. That maybe, with enough distance, I would be able to put the pieces of my life back together. But the weight of my choices never left. Every morning, I woke up with that sinking feeling in my chest, that crushing realization that I had single-handedly destroyed the life I had built. At first, I told myself I just needed to keep moving forward. I found a small apartment, nothing like the one I had shared with my ex, but enough to get by. I picked up extra shifts at work, told myself that staying busy would help keep the guilt at bay. But no matter how much I distracted myself, the past followed me like a shadow. I stopped going out. I avoided the places where we used to go together. I even deleted my private Instagram account, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. I wanted to reach out to him, even if it was just to say I was sorry, to explain myself, to somehow make him understand that I hadn't set out to hurt him, that I had been lost, confused, and selfish, but never malicious. But I knew that no apology would ever be enough. So I stayed silent. And then one night, I found out what he had been up to. A friend of mine, one of the few who had stuck around after everything came to light, sent me a message late one evening. "You're not going to believe this." Attached was a photo, my ex, with someone new. The woman in the picture was beautiful. She had this effortless, natural confidence, the kind of presence that lit up a room. And she was smiling. He was smiling too. A real, genuine smile, the kind I hadn't seen on his face in months before everything fell apart. I stared at the picture for a long time, my stomach twisting into knots. I should have been happy for him. After everything I had done, after all the pain I had caused, he deserved someone who would treat him better. But that's not what I felt. What I felt was jealousy, and something even worse, a sick, burning anger. Because it wasn't just that he had moved on. It was that he had moved on so easily, like I had never even mattered. For weeks, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that this was just the consequence of my actions, that I had no right to feel anything about his new relationship. But the thought of him being with someone else festered inside of me. And then, I saw them in person. I was walking home from work when I spotted them together at a cafe down the street. He was sitting across from her, leaning in slightly, listening to whatever she was saying with that same attentive focus that used to be reserved for me. It was like a punch to the gut. I don't even know what came over me, but suddenly I wasn't walking home anymore. I was standing outside that cafe, watching them through the window like some kind of ghost from his past, and then, as if sensing me, he turned. Our eyes met. For a moment, the world stood still. But then he did something that shattered me. He looked away. No reaction, no anger, no sadness. Just nothing. Like I was a stranger, like I didn't exist. I turned and walked away before the tears could spill over. That night, I did something reckless, something I told myself I would never do. I messaged him. It was a short message, just 2 words. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the little read notification to appear. When it finally did, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Then, the 3 little dots appeared. He was typing. I held my breath, and then his response came. No, that was it. No hesitation, no anger, just finality. I felt my throat tighten, my hands shaking as I stared at that single word. I could have left it there. I should have, but I couldn't stop myself. Please. Just one conversation. This time, the response was instant. You don't get to ask for that. And then, he blocked me. That should have been the end of it. That should have been my wake-up call to finally let go. But instead, I let the bitterness consume me. I wanted him to feel the same pain I felt, the same humiliation, the same loss. I wanted him to know what it was like to be discarded like an afterthought. And so, I did something cruel. I still had photos, messages, pieces of our past that I knew he wouldn't want the world to see. I didn't share them publicly. I wasn't that far gone. But I did send them to her, the new girl. I told myself it was just to warn her that she deserved to know what kind of man she was dealing with. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wanted to ruin this for him. I wanted to hurt him the way he had hurt me. It didn't take long for him to find out what I had done. The next morning, I woke up to a single message from an unknown number. Stay away from us. I knew it was from him. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt empty. Because in that moment, I realized something. I had become the villain. I had done all of this to myself. The regret, the loss, the isolation, it was all my own doing. And instead of owning up to it, instead of accepting the consequences and moving on, I had let my bitterness turn me into someone I didn't even recognize, someone pathetic. I didn't try to reach out again after that. I didn't try to fix things, because there was nothing left to fix. I had burned every bridge, poisoned every well, and now I had to live with it. It's been months since that last message. I'd like to say that I've grown, that I've learned my lesson, that I'm a better person now. But the truth is, I'm still figuring it out. Some days, I feel like I'm making progress. Other days, the guilt and shame creep in so heavily that it's hard to breathe. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. I don't know if I even deserve forgiveness. But I do know one thing. I will never be the person I was before. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.